Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk on Access Humboldt. You're either listening to us on KZZH 96.7 or you're watching us on Channel 12. I have never actually visited the studio, but my partner here, my name is Eric Kirk. Chuck Rogers is actually coming to us from the studio tonight.
Yes, between two ficus trees here in the studio. So it's very nice. Very nice.
You know, a ficus once ran for office back east with Michael Moore's campaign and actually won. But another time we'll talk about that. The so I actually didn't win. It got a lot of votes. So tonight we've got a lot to talk about, but we're going to do something special towards the end of the show. As any of us, those of you who have watched us, you know that part of our format is we get to the last 5 minutes of the show, and you and I make predictions, and we've been doing that since pretty much the beginning, since we started the show back in, or the television version of the show back in the spring, and I think we even started before that, but decided to pull. Matt Knight has pulled out four predictions each of us have made, and we talked about the three of them that we got right that we think was probably the most memorable, and two of them that we bombed, and I actually got 2 and 1 because I actually had 2 predictions one night and I bombed on both of them. But we'll talk a little bit about that, and it should be a lot of fun. And Matt has set up a real fun format for it, so that will come later. But in the meantime, the big news that we need to talk about is the COVID bill that Donald Trump did at the last minute after it was signed, said that it's not enough payments, and he wants the defamation protection for social media overturned, and he wants a commission to investigate, all the alleged fraud and all of that. And the Democrats said, hey, who had to basically negotiate from $1,200 payments down to $600 just to get anything, because a lot of Republicans were opposed to any other COVID payments. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Donald Trump says, well, I want 2,000. The American people deserve 2,000. And the Democrats, as I think we reported last week, said, fine, here we go. We've got a bill for you. Why don't you pump for it? And, and they tried to pass it by unanimous consent, got blocked by the Republicans in the House, nothing on the Senate floor. And they scheduled it for a full House vote on Monday morning or Monday afternoon, and but instead of pushing for it and joining with the Democrats, Trump kind of caved and signed the COVID bill the night before, Sunday night, after playing golf all weekend, and no indication that he's put any pressure on Republican senators to agree to the 2,000. It probably would be a done deal right now, with the Republicans basically not even allowing the measure to come to the floor. But Bernie Sanders has kind of a filibuster type thing going because the Congress wants to override Trump's veto on the defense bill. And I guess procedurally, Bernie Sanders was able to delay it until Friday, saying, I'm not going to let that go forward until you at least allow the COVID bill to come to the floor, because they're going to pass it. The 2 Georgia senator candidates and incumbents are desperate to have actually come out in support of it, as well as 2 other Republicans. So it would pass, but Mitch McConnell has not allowed it to come to the floor and will not. He's possibly putting together the poison pill with those other 2 provisions that Democrats won't vote as a way to try to help the Georgia Senate candidates. And so we're at an impasse. It's probably not going to pass. I'm certain that the Georgia candidates who are supporting the $2,000 payments until Tuesday will change their minds on Wednesday, regardless of whether they win or lose. So what do you want to say about that, Chuck?
Well, I think this is all political theater. I think you're right. I think McConnell has no intention of allowing this to come to a vote in the U.S. Senate. So we're going to be stuck with the $600. That is almost insulting to people who have been out of work since this pandemic started, maybe are facing eviction and so on. So the $2,000 is clearly what people need. Interestingly, those candidates in Georgia that you mentioned, Loeffler and Perdue, were opposed to the 2,000 beforehand. Then when Trump got on board with 2,000, then all of a sudden they're all for it. I think Trump could, as we have mentioned before on this show, Trump came at this after the fact. If he had really wanted $2,000, if that was really a policy decision on his part, then the administration could have been involved in this long before it ever came to a vote in Congress, and could have helped in drafting the legislation and getting exactly what they wanted for the people of America. But that's not how he operates. He came out with the $2,000 thing after the fact, just as a way to get himself back into the news, back into the center of attention, and to re-energize his base. And then, of course, the candidates in Georgia are put into a difficult situation, especially the Republicans. They had to jump on board with the 2,000 to appeal to all of the constituency in Georgia, because it would have been horrible for them to oppose something like that in the middle of a pandemic when people need the money. So I think what McConnell's doing is he's not going to bring it to a vote, but there's nothing going to be done on it until the January 5th election. Election day is the 5th, so that Perdue and Loeffler can continue to talk about the need for the $2,000 until Election Day. And I agree with you, starting on January 6th, you won't hear Loeffler and Perdue saying anything at all about the $2,000. But the addendum to this, I think, should be that the Biden administration has said that they view this as only part one, that there will be something else on the way, but that could depend on the Georgia election, right?
Yes.
So, and the control of the Senate. So we'll see. I mean, there is still hope that the Biden-Harris administration is on board with $2,000, but how to get that done might depend on the results in Georgia on the 5th.
Right. Although they're going to have to seriously considering just abolishing the filibuster, or at least bringing back some of the old rules. You know, we all saw the movie Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, where they were forced to talk about it. They've made it way too easy to filibuster. You just have to not show up or just say no. You don't want to vote. You don't want to debate. They made it way too easy. It should be something that you got to earn. I mean, I think it should be, that you got to keep talking so that the news is covering you, and so that it becomes whatever it is, for whatever reason you're objecting to it, it becomes a national discussion, so that all the senators can ascertain what is the national consensus on it. But they've just made it way too easy. And I also think we really need to have a constitutional amendment that allows for at least some overriding of the Senate majority leader from being able to just arbitrarily block bills from the Senate floor. It's one thing, to vote against it, but to not even allow it to come to the floor for discussion when it will pass. If it's allowed a full debate. I mean, that's just, and I know it's been done in the past. I don't know that it's been done as often as Mitch McConnell has done it over the past decade. So those are the impediments that we have. And of course, all of a sudden the Republicans are concerned about debt again. But Lindsey Graham is willing to consider it as long as they have those other two poison pill measures in it, basically making it so that if social media are going to do any fact checking, that they be held accountable for any alleged defamation, which will basically shut it down. And then secondly, to have a commission for a BS investigation of BS claims of, I think now they're on their 62nd or 63rd lawsuit that they're about to, lose, including that one against Pence. And we'll talk a little bit about that scenario a little bit later. But it's absolutely shameful that they aren't getting 2,000. In fact, really, it should be like Europe. We should have been getting 2,000 a month. It would pay for itself. It would, yes, it would increase the deficit of outlay, but they completely, when they're not, the president is in power, they completely discount the fact that it can be offset by enough stimulus that leads to more taxable transactions revenue, and can actually lower the deficit if you stimulate the economy. And they're saying, well, it should be more targeted. What is more targeted than giving it to the consumer and then letting the businesses go after that money? The whole problem with supply side is that you give it to the businesses and it turns out they just sit on it. Right? They don't necessarily.
Yeah, especially since we are in a consumer-driven economy in this country, right? Our economy at this point depends on consumption. And when consumers don't have the money to spend, there is no consumption. So, but you're right. Republicans do this. It's a roller coaster ride with them. When they're not in power, it's all about spending, right? So, and the debt and so on. So, we can expect during the Biden-Harris administration to hear all about how we can no longer afford Medicare. We can no longer afford Social Security. We can no longer afford many of the plans that we have in place. We're going to have to cut all of those and then allow Wall Street maybe to take some of the money and invest it for individuals. So that's what we're going to be hearing, right? That's what it always comes down to. And then there will be some Republican administration that'll come into office and will get us into debt again. We'll destroy the economy again, and the Democrats will have to clean it up. That's the pattern we've been in for how long now? Decades now.
I think that pattern was actually a Republican think tank came up with that in the 1970s. When Reagan came to office, right. We were in a stagflation kind of recession, in which when Carter finished out, and then Reagan caused a double dip with supply side, trying to cut back taxes and giving it to the people who invest money because they'll invest it. And like I said, they started to use it for acquisitions. They put it in their pillowcase and kept it. And they do this every time. I mean, Say's law is absolute BS trash. The one where if you put money into the hands of a capitalist, that it's automatically productive. It's not. They'll keep it if it's not going to be productive. If there isn't a consumption base, they'll hold on to it like they did through the first few years after the crash under Obama. So it's a joke. You give it to the consumer, then the capitalist chases after it. That's the whole concept. And they'll spend it on the way that's productive in terms of what consumers want. That's that's how supply and demand is supposed to work. But Ronald Reagan, when he caused the double dip to recession, managed to send Cap Weisenberger on a mission to convince the country of Soviet military superiority, which they've since admitted was a total myth, and that justified massive increases in military spending, which led to a deficit between 1980 and 1984, which exceeded all the prior deficits going back to George Washington. I mean, it's just, and then when Clinton came to power, he actually managed to get the deficits back under control. Bush, with his multiple wars, managed to get it back up again and managed to sink the economy at the same time. And then Obama, again, had to fix the economy. It seems like every, 1992, 1932, 2008, and now 2020, a Democrat has to come in to clean up the mess of a Republican administration. I know that sounds really biased, but I don't remember an incident, unless you count the stagflation recession that happened under Carter. But again, Reagan messed it up before he made it better. So it is ongoing, and yes, they will be tight-fisted from here on in, and will do everything they can obstruct. They don't even like the $600 because that is bound to stimulate the economy and benefit Biden.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And 2000 would do so even more. I completely agree with you, and I think you're right. I think a lot of the economic troubles that we've seen on this roller coaster ride with the economy over the last few decades can, and I think you're right, can in fact be traced back to the Reagan years, following on the Carter years. But I do agree, and there's just no evidence that enriching the rich even more means that a lot of that cash will trickle down to all the rest of us. It just doesn't happen. You know what does happen? They like having more money, so they invest it for themselves. They spend it on themselves, maybe, but a lot of it is just invested. And if you look at the trend lines, income lines from, say, the 70s and 80s, all the way up until contemporary times, you'll see that the wealthiest amongst us have done really well over those 30 to 40 years, right? But what used to be called the middle class, the income is level. It's plateaued. There's been no increase, although inflation has increased. So actually, the folks at the top are doing very well over the last 40 to 50 years. Those of us not in the upper income echelons have not seen anything at all. We're still trying to get by on what we were making a long time ago.
Right, and especially when there's no strings tied to it.
Yeah.
The tax breaks that Reagan gave and pushed through and got in the early 1980s, and the reduction in fees and all of that for rich people, the supply side, rather than the demand side, the supply side approach, basically. It got used primarily for mergers and acquisitions, which was the big thing at the time of consolidation of capital. It doesn't, whereas it should have been tied to retooling and hiring people. Unfortunately, Obama and the Democrats kind of caved in 2009 as well in when they were bailing out the banks by not mandating that it go to lending. Or at least a portion of it go to lending. They didn't want to lend. Their lending was bad for them because the economy was in the tank. Go figure. They instead wanted to use it to invest, buy back their own stock, support their things so that they could look better because they looked really bad after crashing, even though the credit agencies, the credit rating people gave them A+ all the time because, they're all buddies. I mean, so, if you're going to give money to rich people, you got to have strings tied to it. You can't just give it to them because, they will stuff it in their pillowcase or use it in a way that is not necessarily economically productive. But a consumer will always be economically productive. The only concern you have about giving too much money to consumers is inflation. And we haven't had an inflation problem since before the 2008 crash. We could use a little inflation actually at times. And you give it to, it's kind of like when you're making the argument for free enterprise, right? All of the people that talk about incentive, if you just give it to the rich people, what's their incentive to try to make more money with it? You give it to the consumer and you tell the rich people, hey, he's got your dollar, go get it from him.
Right.
That's how it's supposed to work, but it's just not how Milton Friedman and F.A. Hayek and all of them think. They think, they're caught up on the virtue that wealth brings to us that makes us productive, and we want to care about our legacies when we're rich. They don't care about their legacies. They just like the power. They like their wealth and the power that it brings them.
Yeah, and sometimes they sell that bill of goods as, if they're on the campaign trail or if they're trying to sell a particular piece of legislation to the public, they'll sell it as, we're going to lower your taxes. This is a tax cut. This is a tax cut. This is a tax cut. Because they know that most people are not going to read a 1,000-page bill that is technical in the financial industry. So, the people, oh yeah, tax cuts, that's great. When in fact a lot of the tax cuts on some of these bills just goes to the upper 1%. And that's, we've been sold a bill of goods, and it's, starting in, the 1980s. And I think you're right. I think it could be traced all the way back to that point. In fact, think about the things that have been done financially since then. It has been all about cutting taxes on the wealthy. If you compare their tax rates through the years up to now compared to what they were prior to that. There's a big difference. And as a result, we haven't been doing big projects in this country, right? Because we haven't been collecting as much. We've still been spending a lot on defense, and that always increases. But big infrastructure plans have gone out the window. We haven't been doing any of that. We're not aspirational. We're not builders anymore. We are only tax cutters for the wealthy.
There is a rumor that Buttigieg has been brought in precisely for big projects to make the sale to the country and to Congress about infrastructure rebuilding, about high-speed rail, about bringing modernization, and that high-speed rail system across the country would be a big project. It would be our first big project in a long time.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because that is one of the examples that is often brought up when talking about finances between 1980 and the current time. The whole high-speed rail trend began in other countries, and we completely missed it. Completely. We didn't do any of it. And it has been terrific for whether it's France or Japan or whoever you want to talk about. But we completely missed it because we don't do big projects like that. We built the interstate highway system, but then we completely missed high-speed rail, while a lot of other countries around the world moved into the future in that way. But we didn't do it.
Yeah. All right. So there is rumor that is going to be what is pushed.
I hope it is, and I hope that Mayor Pete can make that sale. Of course, then he'll be Secretary Pete. But if he's confirmed, we also have that hurdle to clear with, depending upon what happens with the elections. But I hope he does get that done. And we need it. All kinds of infrastructure projects. As we've mentioned on this show before, architects and engineers have been telling us for decades and decades at this point that our bridges are falling down, our road system is crumbling, all sorts of things. It's a long, long list that we have not taken care of. We have not been maintaining our home here. And I hope that Secretary Pete can do a good job of making that sales pitch.
Well, and I want to bring it back to a little bit about the discussion of the politics, because, of course, we have this situation where Trump informally asked for the 2,000, but he isn't. You mentioned that he hasn't been pushing it even before this. He isn't even really pushing it now. He played golf all weekend. Yep. There's no indication that he's on the phone with Mitch McConnell saying you got to pass that. There's certainly no coordination with the Democrats that have done everything they can to support that proposal. He's not serious about it. He knew it wasn't going to happen. It was just his FU to the Republicans for not supporting his military coup. That's basically it. And his options are down to this goofy plan that they've got, that the Senator Hawley, who wants to be a big time player at this point, is going to object, so that they got to go through the ritual of the debates and the rest, and it just looks bad for the country. But and there's a lawsuit right now against Pence saying by Arizona Republicans saying you have to choose our electors and not the ones that were officially chosen. There's no basis for that. There's nothing in the Constitution. Basically, Pence's job will be to count the Electoral College votes in front of both branches of Congress, with all of them watching, and to announce the results. Doesn't give them any discretion to accept alternative, Electoral College votes or any of that. It doesn't. There's nothing. There's nothing in the Constitution that gives them the power to do that. It looks like the way the 12th Amendment does it is basically it's pretty much ceremonial. But and we know that he's resisting the theater, because we know there was reports out a few days ago that Trump was ranting that Pence was weak and disloyal. Well, that's the only reason he would say that.
Well, and what is Mike Pence going to do? Because let's recall that he probably has designs on running in 2024. So he's going to be in a difficult situation here. If he doesn't do Trump's bidding, Trump is not going to be the one to try to rally the Trump base for him. in the next presidential election cycle. On the other hand, if he does go through with this and jumps on board with, you mentioned Senator Hawley, that's Josh Hawley from Missouri, and in the House of Representatives, it's probably going to be Louis Gohmert from Texas, and that's going to be the brain trust that's going to try to get this done. So I don't know what Mike Pence is going to do. He's going to be in a difficult situation. So that'll be interesting to watch. And again, that's happening on January the 6th. Here's the other thing that's happening on January the 6th. Trump, over the last couple of days, has been begging for his people to come to Washington for January the 6th. And a lot of them are planning to do so. Now, what that means, nobody knows. There are folks who are writing about it. Some of them think nothing's going to happen. Others think there's a chance that violence could happen in Washington on January the 6th. We don't know, but that's where we are. And with with both houses getting to the point where they need to certify the decision of the Electoral College, let's not forget that Richard Nixon had to do that, and he did it. Al Gore had to do this, and he did it. Folks who have been defeated, but they have to preside over the ceremony that announces their defeat. So if Richard Nixon can do it, if Trump and Pence can't do it, that will put them even beneath Nixon. In some ways, that's where they already are, but this will certainly cement that.
Absolutely. Nixon was a statesman. That was the difference. He was a statesman. He was corrupt. He was a bully. Probably the worst president, maybe on par with Ulysses Grant in history up until this current one. But this past 4 years have been a nightmare, and people are going to be celebrating once this is done. I mean, it's just it's not that the better candidate won. It's that this was a 4 years absolute nightmare, putting democratic institutions, pressing them to their limits. And again, I think we talked a little bit about this last week, but he has a blueprint now because he's got a following. And if somebody else steps into those shoes who's more competent and more politically effective than Trump was, we could be in trouble in this country. And what's his name? The head of the Lincoln Project? He's Steve Smith. That's his single issue now. Yeah. He's worried about it. He's in consult with everybody across, even AOC he's talking to, who he has very little in common with. That is his single issue to prevent that from happening, because he was watching it, and it's just everything we see from the absolute refusal to accept the election results. Today, the state police, whatever it is in Georgia, just did their check of the ballots in Cobb County that was requested. They counted, found no evidence of fraud. Right. 10 ballots that were maybe not done the way they should have been in terms of the signatures, but no evidence of fraud. They actually called all of those voters, and those voters all said, no, that was me. My signature might have been different from what was on record, but that was me. I mean, and immediately Trump's response was to switch to another county and say, well, that county was the bad one, and that should have the recount. So it's just, they're just going to push it and push it and push it. And you've got gutless people like Loeffler and Perdue who are just, who are running scared of their own shadows right now because they don't know what the Trump voters are going to do.
Yeah, Trump is just a petulant child. He's a 4-year-old. I used to give him credit for being a 7th grader, but I think I've revised that a number of times. He's a 4-year-old. But Steve Schmidt, is, let's not forget, he was McCain's campaign chairman. So, he's a lifelong Republican. And he says now that he's a one-issue voter, and that issue is resuscitating American democracy. And, he's not alone, and there are people in both parties, and there are people who are independent who are calling for all kinds of things, like the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact, which states agree that their electors will vote for whoever won the national popular vote. So far, they have enough states signing on to that they're at about 180 or so, I believe it is, electoral votes. So they need, about 90 more or so. So they're not there yet, but, ranked choice voting would help. In fact, that would also help with third, fourth, and fifth parties as well.
Yes.
I would love to see things in the wake of Trump, like multi-representative districts, so that we could maybe get away from the urban-rural winner-take-all kind of thing at some point. I think that would help. Anyway, strengthening ethics, regulations, and laws, of course, things like that. Mandatory tax disclosure for people who are running for president. Some people have said that should be not just for president, but for U.S. Senate, U.S. House, even governors. Yeah. So we'll see. There are a lot of reforms that could be done. Some would require constitutional amendments. Others could be done legislatively if there was the political will. Right. So we'll see. There are a lot of people like Steve Schmidt who are working on it, and the things that could be done legislatively would be much easier to get done.
But I think he realizes this because he was not only backing, spending money against Trump, but also against Republican senators.
Yes,
I actually think, in a way, the one who scares me even more than Trump is McConnell. He has ruled with an iron hand against all of the spirit of anything Democratic for 10 years now. It's all strictly about power for him. He's got a strict agenda. Friendships, go down as who he worked with and the rest. I mean, that is the power base that has to leave, because that's what made Trump even possible. That's what has kept the economy from a full recovery for 10 years. And that is absolutely what has made politics absolutely put into balkanized since into two camps. It is him more than anything, and basically he showed Trump who was in charge over this past week.
Absolutely. Well, and the United States Senate is a great example of why this our American democracy is broken. It's the least representative body that we have. That's why a guy from Kentucky can basically run the country, not being elected by the whole country. So all kinds of reforms need to happen. I particularly favor D.C. statehood and statehood for Puerto Rico, which would help.
Yes.
But until the reforms can be put in place, we have Mitch McConnell.
I know, and I saw it. I thought, okay, after the COVID bill was passed, it wasn't like, oh, we came together and in a show of unity. He just immediately took praise for it, thanked Trump for something, and then blamed the Democrats. There was no conciliatory effort whatsoever in that speech. It was basically politics, pure, raw, cold power grab. Yeah. And that is absolutely, and he's going to keep getting reelected in Kentucky. Yeah, his opponent turned out not to be as strong as everybody thought she was. Spending money doesn't necessarily have the impact that it used to have on elections, but it really doesn't matter until Kentucky voters decide that they don't want this, because right now, he is basically preventing anything from happening in terms of governing, because for him it's strictly about power. We now have a very highly stacked Supreme Court, because basically Trump got 5 years of appointments instead of 4 that every president should get, because pretty much McConnell blocked everything in the final year with Obama, and he's going to play games with the cabinet. He's going to play games with the with any judges that are going to be appointed, and it will only end if he is no longer in charge, and that's up to the Georgians on Tuesday.
Yeah, well, and one of the lessons is that this is what happens when people in leadership lack empathy for other human beings. I mean, that's who Trump and McConnell are.
Okay, in the meantime, Matt Knight has put together a wonderful presentation of our predictions. 3 predictions that each of us got right, 1 prediction that each of us got wrong. We'll talk a little bit about it afterwards, but here it is.
Okay, predictions. One, okay, this one is my prediction for the October surprise. My prediction for the October surprise is on the Biden side. I think Joe Biden, given his close, long friendship with the McCain family, is going to convince Cindy McCain to endorse him in October. And I cannot think of a more revered person in Republican circles, and deservedly so, than John McCain. And I think that Cindy McCain has had enough. And I think that there's going to be something happen with Cindy McCain in October, maybe before, but certainly in October. My prediction is that the time between November the 3rd and January 20th, which is Inauguration Day, is going to be characterized, or can be characterized, by one word, and that is struggle. It's going to be a struggle between Election Day and Inauguration Day. There's no way to avoid it because Trump is not going to accept defeat. I'm convinced of that. He's not emotionally or psychologically capable of accepting bad news like that. There's still a Trump rally scheduled for Saturday in Georgia, specifically in Valdosta, Georgia. Now, what's going to happen? Ostensibly, he's supposed to be there to help generate interest in Republicans for the runoff elections for the 2 Senate seats, which is happening January the 5th. My prediction is, though, that Trump will get there and he might mention Perdue and Loeffler and their runoff races for a minute or two. The rest of that rally is going to be like Festivus for Donald Trump. It is going to be an airing of grievances on an epic scale. He's going to talk about the fact that the election was stolen. What should he do? What should everybody do there? It's unfair. He hasn't been treated fairly. We know all of those things that he says. But I think get the popcorn ready and your beverage of choice, because this is going to be something that we haven't seen before. That's just my prediction. But I cannot imagine him going there and just talking about Loeffler and Perdue and their race. That's just not who he is. Yeah. Two predictions, just to follow up on one of yours. I think that Biden will win Iowa. I hope Joni Ernst is defeated, but I think Biden's going to win Iowa.
All right. Well, my prediction is I think Trump is going to realize he can't move the numbers unless he's got those rallies, or at least he's going to think that. And I think he's going to attempt the rallies again, whether they'll be involve social distancing or whether he'll just say, hell with it. Sorry, Herman Cain, but we're going to do this. And I'm predicting that there won't be a big change. I think that that Biden will win the popular vote, probably by as much as 5%, and but it may be as low. I think he has to win it by at least 3 to guarantee and maybe that doesn't even guarantee an electoral college win. But I believe he's going to win by the popular vote, and I cannot predict whether that's going to be the outcome of the election. Well, this is what I want to say, and people who are maybe anxious about the lawsuits that are going to happen and the recounts and all of that. This is not 2000. It's not going to happen the same way. The Supreme Court is not going to have the grounds to even look at all reasonable in this. And they're going in with lawsuits, which their lawyers are embarrassed, trying to come up with reasons why the voting in Pennsylvania, they should stop counting. They tried to do it in Michigan on the basis that their poll watchers hadn't been given enough access. I think that got rejected. Doesn't matter. It's counted now. I don't think they've got an argument. They've just got, they haven't presented any argument, let alone evidence of fraud. They've just basically said it, hoping that their followers will just believe them. All right, I've got a couple. One of them real quickly is I think that South Carolina, the Senate race is going to be really close. I'm not going to predict who's going to win because I think it's going to be really close. But I think Graham has had some serious missteps, and Harrison is really a good candidate. And I think the black vote there, even though they're only 28% of the voters, is really energized. Once the election happens, if Biden wins, there will be no stimulus package until January. All right. I think most of mine stand on their own. Okay, it was 4.5% rather than 5%, but I had a pretty good feel for that. My map came out pretty good, and I think it matched my prediction for the popular vote. And I don't want to say anything about the other ones I got right, but I just want to say in my defense about the two I got wrong. I did two at once. One was, well, I really did think that the South Carolina election would be a lot closer than it was. I just completely misread that. I just thought that, people would hold Graham to some kind of accountability for just lying through his teeth. But I was wrong. And in my defense about the COVID bill, it almost happened, but then Trump wimped out. I actually didn't predict that Trump would cave that easily. Chuck?
Well, the one I got wrong, and I had been predicting this for a long time, way ahead of the election. I thought that Joe Biden would win Iowa, and I thought that Iowa Senator Joni Ernst would lose. So my one wrong one was actually a two for there. Interestingly, if you look at the election results from Iowa, though, it mirrors what's going on in the United States. The urban areas in Iowa were all blue. The rural areas in Iowa are all red, and you can take a look at the map. So that's maybe instructive for us at least. Another one, I was hoping that Cindy McCain would not just tell Joe Biden privately that she supported him and maybe make a few comments, but that she would actually do so publicly. And I'm somebody who's kind of a skeptic about the value of endorsements, with a few exceptions. Cindy McCain in the state of Arizona being one. Another one might be Jim Clyburn in South Carolina. So I was glad that she ultimately did that, and we'll never know exactly how much of a difference that made for Biden in Arizona, but we know that that was a must-win, and it did work. So, all
right, we need to do that. I also want to quickly point out that my prediction about the super spreader, return to the super spreader events, he did it within a week of my prediction. Yeah. So, all right, let's discuss our predictions. Let's talk about Georgia. What are your predictions?
Well, I have gone back and forth on being very optimistic about Warnock and Ossoff. And being pessimistic. Right now, I'm a little bit in between. I have a feeling that Warnock it might win. If you look at what's going on with early voting and who's voting and so on, I think that Warnock might beat Kelly Loeffler. I'm more concerned about Jon Ossoff beating Senator Perdue, who's the Republican incumbent. There are times when I think Ossoff has a real chance at that, and then there are times when I'm not so sure about that. So as of tonight, I'm thinking that the Democrats will win one and the Republicans will win one. I think Warnock will win, and Ossoff will lose.
All right. I'm going to say it's going to be one way or the other. I don't think there'll be a split. I think either Democrats will win two or the Republicans will win two. I'm bullish. I also go back and forth, but I'm bullish on the Democrats for a couple of reasons. One is the early turnout vote is really favorable in the Democratic areas, lagging behind in the Republican areas. We'll see what the turnout is like on Tuesday, but also the polls. Now I know we're not supposed to pay attention to them, but Survey USA, which was the most accurate poll, rated A by 538, have Warnock and Ossoff ahead over 50%.
Yeah.
They're an outlier, but they may be seeing something that other pollsters aren't. But the big one for me today was Trafalgar, which has basically had the two Republicans ahead. Today, their polls had Ossoff ahead by 1, and I think Warnock by 1.5 or 2 points, something like that. So based on that, and because I think there is at this point more energy and a real potential for a lot of Trumpers sitting the election out, because there is still a call for that boycott. I know it's Georgia, but I'm feeling bullish for the Democrats this time around. But I think it's all or nothing. I think that there are just very few people who are going to split their tickets on this. I think it's so polarized, maybe some, but it's either going to be both Democrats or both Republicans.
Well, I hope you're right. I hope I'm wrong about this, but my biggest concern is same-day turnout, which is usually bigger for Republicans than Democrats. And so that's why I'm hedging my bet a little bit. And I think Warnock is going to win big in Atlanta. And I think Ossoff will do okay in Atlanta, but not as well. And that's my concern is that Ossoff won't be able to run up the score in his race enough in Atlanta and Macon and Savannah to overcome the what Purdue is going to get in the rural areas. So as of right now, I'm thinking Warnock wins, Ossoff loses.
All right. Well, that concludes our shows for the year 2020. We will be back next year for more. You would think it would be a boring time, but it's not, because everything's going to be happening right then and there. Want to thank Matt Knight for really putting together an excellent presentation tonight. And again, you can see us on Tuesday and listen to us on Tuesday and Wednesdays at 7 o'clock, or you can watch us on Channel 12 at 7:30 or on Wednesdays and 8:30 on Saturdays, and sometimes other times as well. And you can also pick us up on the Access Humboldt page of YouTube. But till next time, thank you, Chuck, and thank you, Matt, and we will see you next year.